everyone, it's Obi Abuchi here with the Leading From Your Core podcast and Vodcast. This show is dedicated to helping leaders all around the world discover leadership wisdom, stories and insights that will enable you tap into the power of leading from the inside out. I'm delighted to welcome to the show Ian Joseph. Ian is a man who wears several hats. He is Managing Director of Trustees Unlimited, which is one of the first B corporations in the UK. And Trustees Unlimited recruits people to join the boards of not-for-profit organizations. He's also the Joint Managing Director of Russam, the oldest interim management company in the UK, and a leading search firm, which this year turns 40. So incredible heritage. Outside work, he chairs the national anti-bullying charity Kidscape and is involved in several other national and global initiatives. Earlier in his career, he was the chief executive of a charity which specializes in the fields of homelessness, addiction, mentoring, and international development. And so much more can be said about Ian. For now, though, Ian, absolutely excited to have you on the show.
Well, I can't believe that's such a great introduction. I was waiting for your guest speaker. Amazing. Who is it?
Absolutely you, my friend. Absolutely you. Really excited. Now, I said there's so much more that could be said about you, Ian, and so our listeners and viewers get to know who you are. What else would you like to say about yourself? And then I'd love you to tag on to that, what you enjoy most about being a leader.
Myself, probably the thing most important to me, I've got a wife and 3 sons. That gives me a lot of pleasure. So that's probably something personal. In terms of leadership, I think it's the ability to have an impact, to carve your own way, and to be autonomous to a certain degree. That flexibility to lead, to do things, to take risks, to have initiative, to make things happen. I think that's a real gift.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. Whenever, as a father of 3 myself, whenever I hear a leader talk about their kids, I always think, yeah, that's probably where you really cut your teeth on leadership. Forget all of the organizational stuff. It's in the home.
And you always remain an amateur. You never become a professional, ever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I hear that. It's ongoing development and growth. But I also love the fact that for you, leadership just is this opportunity to make a mark, to grow, to take risks, to develop yourself. So we'll be diving into some of that today. Now, in your role, you deal with leaders all the time, right? You are having to not only connect with them, but you're placing them within organizations. You're speaking to organizations around the world. And so I'm going to start off with a biggie for you, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. But we're in 2022, post-COVID, lots of change. What would you say are some of the most significant challenges that leaders are facing today?
That's such a big question, and I think we would probably need hours to really wrestle with that. I think the world is changing much faster than it's ever changed before. We've got geopolitical tectonic plates moving in a way they haven't moved probably for 60, 70 years, thinking obviously about war in Europe, but of course other things going on around the world. I think there's probably a mental health crisis just around the corner. I'm not an expert, but I worry for younger people that have been cooped up, particularly for really young people, where 2 years of their life is a significant proportion of their life. You know, for you and I, who are a little bit more vintage, shall we say, it's it's a smaller part. But for younger people, I think we haven't really begun to see the ramifications of isolation and COVID. layering on that the adaptation of technology and how that affects younger people. So I guess to answer your question, there are lots of things. I think my attention is perhaps more drawn to the next generation and concerns about how they're going to cope. Having said all of that, and I think part of this podcast is about resilience, I think human beings are resilient and they adapt. And so I'm very optimistic about the future, but it's not without its challenges. And we haven't even talked about inflation and Taiwan and, all these other sensitive issues. But
Yeah. As you said, we could chat for hours, lots of topics, lots of pressures that leaders are facing. And I put all of that in that bucket of the pressures of the external, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity that stresses us on the outside, but also on the inside. And you're right, for me, a big thing is resilience, because these things are squeezing us all of the time, whether we're seasoned leaders, we're emerging leaders, we're the younger generation. How do we navigate that? How do we make sense of it? And you started talking about resilience. So let's go there then. What does resilience mean to you? And why do you think it is important in life and in leadership?
Yeah, again, another big question. I mean, I think life is difficult. It's an illusion to think otherwise, and everybody suffers. There's an inevitability to it. If you're born on this earth, you will suffer, and you will go through potentially trauma, and you will go through difficulties. And that's not to rain on the parade of life as beautiful, but life is tough. And I think some people are under an illusion that actually life shouldn't be tough, but no, that's not true. Life is tough. And so resilience is absolutely core if you are going to not only survive, but to thrive in this gift that we have called life. And I think resilience is developed by going through suffering, and there is a purpose to it. And by going through it and overcoming it, your proverbial shoulders get wider and stronger. I think it's always quite telling that the people that have suffered the most are often the most empathetic to others. And that makes me think, actually, yes, it's horrible, but there is a reason behind it. So I think resilience is absolutely vital. One other thing I would say, I heard a statistic recently. I don't want to misquote the statistic, but it was something like, for people that have experienced trauma, what percentage of them would not like to change the incident that caused the trauma in the first place? And it was something like 90 or 95% wouldn't change a thing. Wow. Because even though it was traumatic, even though it was tough, there was something about going through that process that enabled them to become better and stronger and more capable, and they wouldn't change it. So yeah, I think resilience is absolutely vital to life, to living, to leadership, to everything.
Wow. I can imagine right now that listeners, viewers watching, listening to this are connecting, hopefully, with some sobering moments in their life and that appreciation of the value of the suffering. You used a word that's become quite important to me. You said beautiful. And I now talk about it in terms of this beautiful complexity. Life is complex, and things that are going on with us as human beings can be complex, but there's beauty in that when you realize that the challenges, the suffering, the difficulties that we face, they're not just there to crush us and put us out of existence, but they're actually there to help us get stronger. And the value of the empathy, the value of the vulnerability, the value of connecting to our humanity, and therefore being able to connect with the humanity of others is so relevant. You were talking about that statistic, and the story that immediately comes to mind, or just my own personal story of my mum going through Alzheimer's, and this is her 8th year now. it's been incredibly difficult. And I remember once she went lost, we were launching our business website and she was missing. She'd gone missing. And I was in tears as we were looking for her. And luckily she showed up the next day. Another time I was out of town getting ready to deliver some training for a leadership team. And I get a call saying she's gone missing. And I just think, how do you manage these? How do you show up and be present and still deliver what you need to as a leader, as a professional, when life is squeezing you? And I look back on those moments and they have taught me so much. The one thing I wouldn't want is, if I could turn back time and if somehow we could get rid of my mum's Alzheimer's, I would absolutely get rid of it. But all of the growth that has come from it, I would not want it. I'd fit life somehow, please give me that pressure and that stress and pain, because the growth has been invaluable. So I completely agree that life is.
Yeah, and I think there's something
to teach us something.
Yeah, and it's about reframing that, because I think historically I always, I would see struggles and difficulties as an obstacle, an inconvenience, as something that wasn't sort of the way it ought to be, but actually reframing it and seeing struggle as a friend, seeing adversity as this is something that can teach me something. And I remember, I think you and I may have talked about this before, but there was a story I heard once, and it was about a cocoon, and the sort of butterfly hadn't quite emerged yet. Yeah. And I love this story because, to me, it acts as a sort of metaphor for what we're trying to say here. So essentially, this chap, he saw this cocoon, and it was kind of, the thing inside was trying to get out, and it was prodding, and it was having real difficulty. And in an act of kindness, he got a scalpel and he slit the side of the cocoon to release the butterfly. But of course, the butterfly wasn't formed properly. It came out and couldn't fly. And it couldn't fly because the purpose of the cocoon and the struggle was to create that struggle. It had to push against, it had to fight, it had to wrestle. And only at the point that it was strong enough, it would be able to break the cocoon and it would fly. And I think sometimes we want life to be easy. We want the cocoon to be split open. We want to just be released from whatever it is we're going through. But we fail to realize that the struggle is what's going to enable us to fly. And I think that's just so powerful.
It is, yeah, that is so powerful. That's a story I heard many years ago. I think Paulo Coelho tells it, and I included it in my recent book, Leading from Your Core, because for me, it is absolutely the best metaphor for growth and transformation as a leader, as an individual. Doesn't come without struggle. If you want to get there without struggle, it is an illusion, as you said earlier on.
Yeah, and I think it's looking how you look at failure. One of the things I love about the US culture is failure is appreciated, it's rewarded. In fact, if you haven't got some stripes on your back, you're not really considered, like you haven't really proven yourself. Someone I was having dinner with recently said, and I don't know whether it's an urban myth, but he said in California, Silicon Valley, the thing is, unless you've tried to set up 3 businesses and failed, you can't really call yourself an entrepreneur. And I love that, whether it's true or not. But again, there's something about, I'd rather be out there trying to do things and failing than not trying to do them at all. But if you're going to try them, you need to have resilience. You got to have and failure, and you get knocked down and you get up again. It's the old. These are ancient principles you and I've talked about before. They haven't changed. You just maybe use different language.
Yeah. Well, let's build on that. I mean, I've heard so many stories out of Silicon Valley that focus on failing forward and leveraging all of the insights from that. So for you personally, what's been one of the most significant failures that you've had as a leader, and what did it teach you about yourself, and what did it teach you about your resilience?
Where does one start, Obi? Again, you need another day to talk about your failures. I've had so many failures. I think probably some of the failures for me are around relationships and relationships at work in particular, and relationships that haven't ended well in the work setting. And of course, it's not, when it's a relationship, it's not all one-sided, it's not all my fault, but I think the way that I've handled conflict, the way I've handled difficult people, the way that I've tried to avoid conflict and therefore created more problems because, you know, the relationship just sort of keeps lumbering on, but then it starts to affect others if you're not decisive. And so I've had situations where I should have been decisive and removed someone, didn't, then it created toxicity and affected the culture. I've had other situations where I've been unhappy with performance and I've not handled it well by being, you know, upfront. I've kind of skirted around the edges, and then it's created confusion. I've been insensitive in emails that have then come back and sort of bit me. And so I think I've been quite unsuccessful actually in a lot of relationships at work. I've had some great relationships, but some I've just not handled very well. And I think what it's taught me is you got to be honest, you got to be in the moment, you got to get help if you think you need it. You got to not avoid conflict. You got to not be so insecure and worried about what people think of you and how you're going to come across. And so all those lessons, and I'm sure there are many more, that's definitely been a failure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. Actually, I've asked a lot of people that question, and sometimes the answers are about an initiative or a venture that they set up and hasn't worked out. But it's great to hear it on the personal front. It's not just something I tried to do that didn't work out, but on a relational level. And I think the reason that's so great to hear is that as a leader, you are interacting with people, you're connecting with people, you're inspiring people, and it really comes down to the best definition that I've heard is just one word: leadership, influence. And I had a word just before that: positive influence. And how do you have that positive influence if you don't know how to connect, engage, and bring out the best in people? But we're not all, well, I don't really think we're born leaders. We are made and formed. And so we've got to navigate those difficulties and not get it right and send that wrong email or that wrong WhatsApp and that wrong text and deal with the tension with people just to grow. So encouraging to hear that. And I mean, I've known you for a while, and I know a lot of the work you're doing now. And so it's clear that you have learned from all of that, and you're growing, and you're having a positive influence.
Learning.
You wouldn't be doing. Learning. Yeah.
Learning.
Absolutely. It's all a spectrum, isn't it? So that's fantastic. I will. Whilst failure's one thing, I'd also love to hear, what about a success? What's a success that you've had, and what has that taught you about resilience? Because I think we can learn about resilience from failures, but also learn about resilience, our own resilience, from success as well. So what one comes to mind of your many?
You're very kind. I think probably actually looking back over the last couple of years and seeing the Russam business survive. And let me put that into some context. So we were, just before COVID hit, for some reason, we had a sudden, almost catastrophic reduction in sales. We had a couple of months where things were really tough, and there were issues in the market moving against us with new legislation around tax and all various things. But anyway, with the markets we were operating in, there was some real issues. And so we went into January 2020 really quite worried, actually, to the point where I was supposed to we were supposed to have somebody start work with us on a Monday. I think it was in February. And on the Thursday before she joined, I had to call her to rescind the offer. And she had given in her notice to her employers. She had, I think, taken a week's holiday, and she was all ready to start. And that was probably up there with one of the worst conversations I've ever had to have with someone, to say, look, you've given up your job. You're supposed to start on Monday. Actually, there's no job for you to come to. And then literally, 2 or 3 weeks later, we went into COVID, and the taps turned off, and that was it. There was recruitment stopped. And so my business partner and I kind of looked at the business and thought, okay, not on our watch. This isn't going to, it's not going to end this way. We're going to do something. And so we did a few things. I think the first thing is we moved very, very quickly and decisively. So we cut costs, 50%, straight across the board. Inevitably, that meant redundancies, unfortunately, but we had to do it. It meant terminating leases, moving another office somewhere else that was cheaper. It meant getting everybody on furlough that was left, getting bounce back loans. It was just, and then it was about, okay, well, let's stay relevant in the marketplace. Let's continue to develop thought leadership. We haven't got much work coming in, but let's keep a profile, let's keep visible. So that was a really, really tricky, 18 months, I would say, of Are we going to get through this? Wind the clock forward 2 years now, and we've just closed out. Last year was a great year for us profit-wise. We made a full acquisition of a business that we owned a third stake in. We now fully own it. That business is blowing it out. We're about to close this year with a very decent year. We've just been on a hiring spree, getting new people on board, both to service existing clients, new clients, look at new markets, look at potential acquisitions, develop our technology stack. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. And so I sort of sit back talking to you now, and I know you and I have had to rearrange this meeting a few times because I've just been running around.
Sure.
I'm sorry about that, but the fact is we are really busy. And I look back now from the vantage point of saying 2 years ago, we didn't know what was going to happen. And actually there was a very real risk we were going to have to put the close sign up. And actually it's completely turned around. And so I'd say that's a success. What did I learn from that? To answer your other point? I think 2 things. One, things do not always turn out as bad as you envisage they're going to turn out. So I think we catastrophize. I catastrophize. I think, oh my goodness, no work's coming in. I'm going to be homeless and this is terrible. Actually, it rarely turns out as bad as you think it's going to turn out. So you've got to be hard on your mind and the way you think. The second thing is you've just got to put one foot in front of the other. You've got to do something. And I think if you sit still and don't do anything, there's going to be problems. But the very act of saying, do you know what, I'm going to explore a new rental arrangement, or I'm going to explore a loan, or I'm going to explore, doing some thought leadership that might help a client, or I'm going to do something. There's something biological that happens with your brain. I don't fully understand it, but you get into a different mindset and you think, actually, I have agency. I can do something. I can make something happen. So I think those, for me, were the 2 big things. One, things don't always turn out as bad as you think. And secondly, you just got to do something. Be active. And if it could be the smallest thing, but just do something and you're moving forward.
Wow. I love that. Thank you. That story is so relevant. I've spoken to a lot of people who have had stories of what's happened over the last 18 months, particularly with COVID, some sobering, some exciting, like yours. And you said something there about being hard on your mind, which is so important. A big thing for me and a big thing for this podcast is about leading from the inside out. And a big part of the inside out is what that internal dialogue, what's going on in your mind, how resilient are your thoughts? And what's your self-talk? Is it negative? Are you, as you say, catastrophizing that it's going to be terrible? Or do you have that optimistic worldview I like to talk about, which is a way of saying, yes, this is a difficult, challenging situation, but there is good that can come out of it. And for you guys, it was, all right, well, how do we strip things bare? How do we make sure we focus on our thought leadership? What can we still offer the world, as challenging a time as this is? And I loved your statement to one another, your business partner, right? That not on our watch, we are going to push forward. And the other thing that I've noticed, and it just, to your second learning point, the thing I've noticed is that how much fear can overwhelm us as leaders. And the thing about fear is crippling. And we all of a sudden create this story of how the world is going to be destroyed in a moment, and therefore it paralyzes us and we do nothing. But just taking that step overrides that fear, because we begin to see the reality. The reality is I could take a step forward. The reality is I could write that email. The reality is we could strip things back, and then you create a different picture in reality rather than in your mind. So that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah, and I think for men in particular, I had some coaching on this once, because many years ago I was going through a really tough time at work, and resilience was the issue. I was struggling with how are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to do things? And someone said to me, certainly as a bloke, sometimes writing things down, what's the problem? What's the possible solution? And the very act of writing it down, what it does, it takes the fight or flight mode from your amygdala and it engages your frontal lobes. And all of a sudden, that sort of emotion of it's a catastrophe, it's a disaster, nothing's good going to happen, I need to go and run away. Actually, you start writing, your frontal lobes engage, and then they start helping you think, actually, no, possibly it's not. And actually, there's a plan. And actually, you might want to do this because that might mitigate it. And so I think journaling or writing things down can be really helpful during these sorts of times. Certainly for me, I think my instinct when I hit a big problem is to kind of sulk, metaphorically, go and sit on a tree for 3 hours and just worry about, the future. Actually, it doesn't help anyone. It's actually selfish. It's self-pity. It's you're not doing anything good for anybody, yourself, the people you love, the people around you. I remember having times during very difficult times at work where I would sit at home around the dinner table, but I wasn't there. I was there physically, but my mind was elsewhere. I was distracted and I was upset and I was catastrophizing. But I had to go through all of that, I think, so that now I can be more fully engaged in the moment, present with the people that I love. And it's not to say again that I'm the finished article and it's like that all the time, but I'm grateful for those difficult times because they've taught me to be different.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Ian. And I know that all too well. I think it was my second or third business that about 10 years ago now, it's 2012, just the market went pear-shaped completely. No clients. In fact, the only opportunity that surfaced was one in Canada. And so I had to consider moving my wife and the boys there. But I was so broken during that period that I had suicidal thoughts. We would be at the dinner table and I wasn't there. It was like a cloud over me, and it was all in my mind. I don't ever remember sitting down and saying, "Hey, so Obi, what can we do?" It was just this story. It's like nothing's coming in. The bank's empty. We're paying the mortgage on the credit card. It's all gone pear-shaped, and my ego was crushed. My mind was a mess. And I look back at it now, and so much of what I do now as a coach, as a speaker, as a leader has been developed from those moments of that dark season and having to wrestle through that, and how I saw myself, and developing my own resilience. And now I remember having...
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, Obi, I mean, the thing is, you're not alone. Because that's the other thing, because when you were going through that, I don't know, perhaps you felt, my goodness, no one understands. This is. But probably when you were going through that, I was going through that. And I suspect so many other business leaders were going through that. Yeah. And I think for men, we don't talk enough. And, we need to share these things. This whole vulnerability piece is not weakness. Yeah. It's strength. It's saying, Obi, I'm struggling. This is what's going on. Can I chat to you about it? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
It resonated so powerfully, because I just think people listening to this, there will be many who feel exactly the way that you and I have felt, and possibly will feel, because there are peaks and troughs in leadership. It's not a bed of roses. It's not straightforward.
Absolutely. And one of the things, and it's taken me a while to connect with it, and this is the value of suffering that we've talked about, the value of those hard moments, those dark nights of the soul that you have as a leader, because it helps you have a perspective, a paradigm shift that can be quite transformational. So one of the things that has changed for me since then, as I look back at that season, was my sense of identity. How did I define myself? I defined myself in one of three ways, and sometimes a combination of all of them. I defined myself by what I did. So, okay, this is what I do, and I'm not able to do it right now. I'm not able to coach. I'm not able to build this business, and therefore I'm a failure. I define myself by what I have. Oh, I don't have any money in the bank right now, so I'm a failure. I define myself by what people said. Well, no one's really saying anything right now, because they're not taking me on as their coach. Their clients aren't coming. And so that's how I defined myself, and therefore a failure. And I had to do a lot of deep work since then to say, Obi, you cannot define yourself by what you do, what you have, what people say, because otherwise they say you're great, you're on top of the world. They say you're terrible, then you're down in the dumps. You don't have anything, then you consider yourself nothing. You're not doing anything, you consider yourself nothing. And so going deep and just connecting with who I am at a much deeper level means that everything I'm doing and things that I get are merely an expression of that deeper Obi who knows his values, who knows what he stands for, who knows that actually he's loved, he's got friends, and yes, you may not have work right now, or the business may be floundering right now, but that's okay. It's not your identity, it's just a situation that if you don't catastrophize, you can navigate your way out of it. And so that's something that's been really powerful for me now, and I feel I'm operating at a much deeper, much richer level. That means that I'm expressing myself in a purer way now, and a far more resilient way, because of that transformation in my identity and how I see myself. I think that's an important one.
You're not defined by the job that you do. You're not defined by even how others perceive you. And I think there's something about, are you comfortable being in a dark room on your own with yourself?
Absolutely.
And if the answer is no, then that deep work you talk about, you got to get the shovel out and start, having a rummage around there, because, you've said it so well. It's your core. It's your core values, who you are. You're happy with yourself. That will enable you to be a better leader.
Yeah. And the thing that is important for people to realize as they listen to my story and your story is that this isn't something that happens overnight. It takes work, it takes reflection. You mentioned earlier on the conversation you had with a coach. I wish we could just give people, here's the pill, here's the formula, but you've got to be willing to do the work, to get the outcome, to get the growth, to get the transformation back to
and go back to the reframing point, actually seeing that as exciting and seeing that as that's the way life is. I mean, I've definitely had times where I felt, oh, I wish just for a straightforward day and nothing changes, you know, no competitive, I'm not having to pitch for work, it just comes in and technology just stays, we've just got an old telephone and, you know, it just, but actually that's not life. Life is, so I made a decision a while back, I can't remember when, but I remember thinking, the reality is the business world is changing faster than it's ever changed before. Everything is in a state of flux constantly. There's never going to be a time where I can just stand still and say, we've arrived, we've got the market sewn up, we've got, you know, the share we want, and we just need to crank the handle and it'll keep going. You know, we're not, I was going to say Coca-Cola or Pepsi, but they're competing against each other for market share.
Sure.
So we're never, ever going to be at a point, ever, where we've arrived and we can just crank the handle and I can go on holiday for 6 weeks, and it's not going to happen. So either I can resent that, or every day I can get up and I can throw myself into it saying, what's the challenge today? What's going to happen today? How do I need to flex and adapt today? And just by making that mental switch makes life actually quite exciting. It's not going to be straightforward. It's not going to be easy, but it's easier to deal with the issues as they present.
Yeah, I love that. Just it makes it exciting. It makes it that reframe. And you said, and it, hopefully everyone listening to this are just picking up on the fact that it's not about changing things out there, because that's the people are all. If you're waiting for the environment to be right and the political landscape to be right, and
you'll be waiting a long time.
You'll be waiting a long time.
Forever.
It's forever. But that mental switch, it's, I'm going to see this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to grow. This is an opportunity to be my best self. This is an opportunity to discover more of my potential. This is rich. And that begins on the inside. That's all that's required. And it can happen in a moment. It can happen in a moment. Just that switch about, I'm going to see what's the opportunity here. What's the opportunity for me as a leader? What's the opportunity for my organization? As you mentioned earlier on, right, that period of COVID, and okay, we're having to downsize here, but how can we position ourselves as a thought leader? You're able to ask some questions that unlock some incredible opportunities and perspectives for you to thrive rather than just survive.
Yeah, you learn through all of these things, and it's a bit like a snowball. It's rolling down a hill, or a mountain. It starts off small, but as it rolls, it accumulates more snow, and it gets bigger and bigger and stronger and stronger. And again, it's another. I'm quite visual in the way I think about things. I see that as life's journey in leadership, or life's journey. Full stop. You're rolling down the hill, and you're accumulating more knowledge, and you're going through more experiences, but it's all good because you're getting bigger and you're getting stronger, and you're becoming an avalanche that nothing can hold you back. You know, I'm stretching it a little bit now, but you get where I'm going.
Absolutely.
And that's wonderful. That's just wonderful to think that, you know, until the day I die, I can be learning. I can be learning about myself. I can be learning about other things. I can be growing. I can be changing. I think the reason some people almost sort of die soon after they retire is they just give up. They give up learning. They feel a sense of entitlement now. I've worked hard. The thinking is all wrong. It's got to change.
Yeah. And this is sort of a by the by, but I don't believe in retirement. I just believe in just perhaps changing my focus for a season, and perhaps at that so-called retirement age, I'm mentoring leaders or investing in the next generation, but never seeing it as that's it. I've done my bit for humanity, down tools and die. I think that just scares me.
Well, no, I mean, it's interesting. I think you change, and I think older people have I say older people of a certain vintage. I'll go back and use that word. I quite like it. I think there's almost a moral imperative to say, if I've got all that wisdom and experience, if I've got all those scars on my back, surely it is incumbent upon me in my later life, in my twilight years, to share and impart and help and serve and give, not to lock myself away and feel like, well, the world's been tough to me and now I'm just going to take everything I can get. No, quite the opposite. In fact, once we finish this podcast, I'm heading into London to meet a friend of mine. She's in her late 70s. We're going to grab a coffee together. She's just stepped off the board of a major medical organization. She's on the board of a business school. She's doing all sorts of interesting things, mentoring, coaching, help.
Wow.
I find that so inspiring. And in fact, I've got lots of friends who are in their 70s and they are intellectually engaged with the world and they are using their skills and experiences to help other people, whether it be sitting on non-profit boards or whether it be coaching or mentoring. And I look at that and they are my examples of where I want to be. There's no way I think when I'm 70, I'm going to be able to sustain, kind of the work rate that I have at the moment.
Sure.
And so I'll need to adapt. I'll need to change. I recognize that. But I don't want to hang up the boots.
Yeah. Wow. Love that. But let's paint a vision of potential sages in the 70s, 80s that are offering wisdom and insight and going even deeper than we could go here, right? Because they'll have 30 odd years on top of us to share all of their insights into resilience. So for the older, the vintage listeners watching and listening to us, go out there and be sages to the up and coming leaders around you. So Ian, just to start wrapping it up and bringing this learning back, I'll wrap up with this question. If you could chat with your younger, less vintage self, just as you were beginning your leadership journey, with all that you've experienced so far, you've seen, you've been through, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think I would tell myself, be less worried about what people think of you. Because the reality is, most people aren't thinking about you anyway. We think they are, but are they really? Probably not. But be less worried, because I think that holds you back.
Sure.
I think similar to that or related to that is, don't think you need to have all the answers. Because I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And if you're in a leadership role, you think you've somehow got to figure everything out. That's not the case. And in fact, the flip side of that is to be intellectually curious and ask lots of questions. I wish when I was younger, when I was sitting in meetings and I didn't really follow what was going on because I was so afraid to look stupid, I wouldn't ask. I missed great opportunities to learn things. And I wish now I'd said, can you just explain that to me again? Or can we have a chat afterwards? I really need to understand. And I think the final thing I would say is be bold and take more risks, because you've only got one life and you don't want to look back on your career or your life and think, if only. I think if only is such a horrible way to think about things. So I would have said, look, be bolder, take more risks, fail more, fail faster, pick yourself up. And so I think there's some of the things that spring to mind.
Love it. I mean, that's for your less vintage self, but an opportunity for every one of us, me included, listening, watching, to take on board, be less worried about what others think about you. It doesn't matter if you don't have all the answers. None of us do. Just engage that curiosity and learn and grow, and then be bold, take those risks. Don't let fear hold you back. Don't let the catastrophizing hold you back. Dig deep for that mental shift that helps you reframe situations, see the opportunities, and move forward. Because the world needs more leaders who are willing to give the best of themselves to help create an incredible world. So, Ian, those are amazing insights. Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks, Obi. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And to all our listeners and viewers, I hope you enjoyed the show. And remember that if you want to be a courageous and resilient leader, if you want to live life on purpose and with purpose, then it starts from the inside out. Have a great day and see you all on the next show.